I'm going to be talking in today's video about bladed jig fishing, in particular alternates to a bladed jig to help you continue catching fish when this bite dies. Because there's going to come a point when those fish have seen a bunch of bladed jigs, maybe you've caught a bunch of fish in an area and they stop biting the bladed jig. There's alternate baits, there's alternate patterns that you can run in that same exact area to extend a bite and keep it going. Especially as we push into the springtime, these fish really get on a bladed jig really well in the shallow grass that's growing up in the beginning of the year. And it's a pattern that you actually saw on that Lake Conroe tournament from the MLF BPT event down there. Those guys started out catching them on a bladed jig, and then as that bite died, as more guys started figuring out that bite went away and they had to make some minor adjustments to keep that bite going. So in today's video, I'm going to break down my top 5 baits that I use as alternatives to a bladed jig to keep that bite going and get some extra fish. Now, when that bladed jig bite dies, for me, I'm not going to slow down. I'm going to keep throwing a winding bait. I'm going to keep trying to cover water, and the way I'm going to do that is by switching to a lipless crankbait. Now, this here is a Bill Lewis rattle trap, probably one of the most iconic lures ever made. And a rattle trap is super effective because you still get that reaction strike and it creates a lot of commotion coming through the water. So when those fish get off of a bladed jig, ripping it out of the grass, they can get on a lipless crankbait doing basically the same retrieve. You cast this bait out over a big grass flat or shallow flat, or even in deep water, and you can rip that bait out of the grass and trigger those fish to bite with a little bit different presentation. The other nice thing is that you can get this bait really into that grass, rip it out effectively, have it come through that really clean, and trigger those fish even more effectively sometimes than you can a bladed jig. That does hang in the grass, but when you rip it out, it wants to fall really fast. A lipless crankbait comes out of the grass and then kind of can flutter down and give those fish an opportunity to eat that bait. So lipless crankbait is probably my number 1 alternative, my number 2 bait when those fish stop eating a bladed jig. One thing my buddy Nick LeBrun also did is not just go to a 1/2 ounce lipless crankbait like I have right here. He actually downsizes and go to a 1/4 ounce lipless crankbait, which is a lot more finesse presentation. So maybe when they get off a big 1/2 ounce lipless like this, or your Strike King Red Eye Shad or your other favorite lipless crankbait in that area, you can downsize, go to that 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce presentation, a little bit smaller body profile, and continue that bite even longer. Now you've gone through a bladed jig, you've gone through a lipless crankbait. What is your third presentation that you're going to pick up to trigger these fish to bite? For me, it's going to be a swim bait. Now if I can get away with it, the swim bait that I'm going to go to is an open hook, top hook style swim bait like I have here. And if that water is a little bit off color and I need a little bit extra vibration and flash, you can fish an underspin like you see right here with the big lead jig head. Fishing like a 4-inch or a 3.5-inch soft plastic paddle sail style swim bait like a Kitech or a Excite Shad Nasty is a really good profile that will kind of extend that bite. It's a little bit more subtle than that lipless and the bladed jig where you don't have a ton of vibration. It's more so just the thump from the paddle tail and a little bit from that underspin, but it will trigger fish to bite. Now let's say you're in an area where you can't get through there with that exposed swim bait hook. You can go to something like your Owner Flashy Swimmer, which you can rig that bait Texas rigged with this little screw lock hook and have a big gap in this hook, but it still creates a lot of commotion, but it keeps your bait a lot more weedless. So if you're fishing a heavier cover area where you need something that is a weedless presentation, you can go to something like the Owner Flashy Swimmer with that underspin blade on the bottom. And for me, this is something that will still give you the added flash and vibration of the paddle tail and the underspin, but is a lot more subtle than that bladed jig and lipless. So I hope you guys are noticing a trend so far. You start out with the bladed jig that you can cover a lot of water with, just wind around. You don't have to really think about it. You go to a lipless crankbait, which adds in the sound factor. You still have the vibration and reaction bite that you can trigger with that bait. Then you go to something a little bit more subtle in that underspin or that swim bait. The next and 4th bait that I'm going to pick up is a jerkbait. And the reason I think a jerkbait is so effective is because once those fish start to get off of that really fast moving bait, that reactionary style lure, you can actually hold this jerkbait in place a lot more effectively by suspending it in those high percentage locations, those areas where those fish are still hanging out, but it's a slower presentation. It gives those fish a time to kind of come up, look at the bait, decide if they want to eat, And you can also trigger that reactionary bite from those fish that are pushed up into that shallower water looking to feed. A jerkbait's also really effective because you can really fish it a variety of different ways. You can fish it really fast, you can fish it incredibly slow, and you have a ton of different color options that you can fish. Obviously the one I'm showing you right here is very translucent. It's very natural shad style color, but you can also go really crazy on the spectrum and fish a really chartreuse bait. You have your fire tiger colors, you have your bright fire craw blaze colors from Berkeley. There's a bunch of different colors out there, so you can really match it to the situation and fish it in a variety of different manners to get fish to trigger. And for me, a jerkbait is that end-all be-all follow-up bait. It's going to get you a lot of bites from those less aggressive fish that are still in that area. So those are my main 4 follow-up baits. But when I'm getting around fish that are still wanting to feed, they're still really hungry, but they just want something that's a little bit different profile or presentation in the water, my secret super sneaky go-to bait is an L-bill style crankbait. Now there's a couple different companies out there that makes one. Strike King makes the Hybrid Hunter and 6th Sense makes the Swank. The reason that I like an L-bill style crankbait is because it's totally different than all of those other presentations that we already mentioned. The uniqueness about this bait actually is in the bill, and when you're fishing this, as opposed to a lot of crankbaits that want to dive nose down and they get deeper as you fish them, this L-bill would basically run horizontally through the water column. So you can fish this bait really effectively around super shallow grass or super shallow wood, but where it really separates itself is as a super slow float. So similar to a lipless crankbait, you can get this thing in and around that grass and trigger those reaction bites, but you can also do something similar to a lipless crankbait where you get it hung in the grass and pop it free, and then stop your retrieve and let that bait just super slowly float up. So when those fish are aggressive, they follow a bait, they don't want to eat it. This is a bait that can trigger those fish into bites. The other thing I really like about this bait is it really imitates a lot of the profiles that these fish are feeding on in the springtime. As you guys can tell, this is a very realistic bluegill imitation, but there's a lot of different colors that you can get to imitate what those fish are feeding on in your bodies of water. If you're fishing around shad fisheries, there's a lot of great shad colors. There's some gold with a black back that looks really, really good in the springtime when that water is a little bit off-colored. There's red color, craw-colored. There's just a bunch of different colors that will match the forage that you're fishing around, but it's in a good profile that will trigger fish to bite. And it's a different presentation that I don't think a lot of fish see. So once you fish through your bladed jig, your lipless, your swim bait, and your jerk bait, I encourage you guys, maybe fish around an L-bill, pick one up, try it out. I believe it's going to become a bait that becomes a staple in your tackle box, especially in that cold water in the spring. So those 5 baits are my follow-up to when they stop eating a bladed jig. Now, if you guys are going out there, and we all love to throw it in the springtime, and you're throwing a bladed jig and they get off that bite and they seem not to want to bite anymore in that area, pick up some of those other techniques, fish them through there effectively, and I believe you can trigger a couple extra bites and a couple extra big fish to bite your lures in the spring. Bladed jig first, then a lipless, then a swim bait, then a jerk bait, and mix in that L-bill if you get a chance and get one in your tackle box. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to check out more content like this, click this video right here. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue your passion.